Plug in and escape. You're listening to Shifter Love. The forest held its breath, and the world bled. Above the jagged teeth of the black pines, a wound had opened in the sky, spilling crimson light onto the forest floor. The blood moon. It was a hunter's moon, a madman's moon, and tonight it was Lyra Hale's only witness. She ran, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged, white plumes. The cold air was a razor against her throat, but the fear was colder still. It coiled in her gut, a living thing with icy claws. Behind her, the howls of the Blackwood pack sliced through the night, not the calls of a hunt, but the jeers of expulsion. Half-blood, unclean, omega filth. The words were as sharp as the stones that cut her bare feet. Her blood, a mix of human frailty and wolf spirit, had always made her an outsider, too weak to be a true wolf, too wild to be fully human. She was a ghost lingering between two worlds, belonging to neither. A branch, skeletal and slick with frost, snagged the worn wool of her tunic, ripping it open at the shoulder. She stumbled, crying out as her knee struck a root twisted like a serpent from the frozen earth. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up her leg. She lay there for a moment, gasping, the metallic tang of her own blood mixing with the scent of damp earth and pine. It was the scent of her own failure. She had to get up. To be caught was to be torn apart. Pushing herself onto trembling arms, Lyra scanned the alien woods. These were not the familiar trails of the Blackwood territory. This was the domain of the Moonfang Pack, a place of legend and terror, ruled by an alpha said to be more beast than man, a monster forged in shadow and rage. A twig snapped in the darkness ahead. It wasn't the sound of a stalking wolf, heavy and deliberate. This was different, sharper. It was the sound of something immense trying and failing to be silent. Lyra froze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every instinct, both human and wolf, screamed at her to be still. She sank lower, trying to melt into the gnarled roots of an ancient oak. The crimson moonlight painted everything in shades of rust and nightmare. And then she saw him. He emerged from the shadows not like a man walking, but like a piece of the night itself, detaching and taking form. He was huge, a silhouette of raw power carved from granite and fury. Moonlight caught the hard lines of his jaw, the severe cut of his cheekbones, and the silver that streaked through his jet-black hair like lightning trapped in a storm cloud. His bare chest was a roadmap of old scars, pale lines that spoke of countless battles won, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten silver, burning with a cold, terrifying light. This was Raven Thorn, the alpha of Moonfang, the beast of the northern woods. He didn't seem to have noticed her. His head was tilted back, his jaw tight as he stared at the blood moon. A low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest, a vibration that Lyra felt in her own bones. It was the sound of a cage rattling, of a monster fighting its chains. Slowly, carefully, she began to back away. Her bare foot slid on a patch of wet leaves, making a soft, squelching sound. His head snapped toward her, the silver eyes narrowed, and in an instant, he was no longer a man staring at the moon. He was a predator who had found his prey. He took a step forward, and the air crackled. The scent that rolled off him was intoxicating and terrifying pine, cold stone, and something wild and musky that was purely his own. It was the scent of dominance, the scent of an alpha. But as he drew closer, something shifted in his eyes. The silver began to swirl with flecks of crimson, mirroring the bloody orb in the sky. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring, and his gaze locked onto the torn fabric at her shoulder, where the scent of her blood was strongest. "You're trespassing, little wolf," he growled, his voice a low thunder that vibrated through the ground. Lyra scrambled backward, her hands digging into the frozen dirt. I was driven out. I didn't know." "You lie," he snarled, taking another step. "No one wanders into my territory on the night of the blood moon by accident." His eyes raked over her, taking in her ragged clothes, her trembling form, her scent. That scent. It seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He staggered, a hand coming up to press against his temple. The crimson in his eyes deepened. "What is that scent?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. It was a scent of wild lavender and rain-soaked earth, but beneath it, something else, something that called to the deepest, most ancient part of his soul. It was a key turning a lock he'd thought long rusted shut. "Mate." The word was not spoken. It was a primal roar in the hollow of his soul, a lightning strike to his heart. The beast within him, the one he fought to cage every waking moment, surged against its bars, howling for release, for her. Lyra saw the change in him. The man was vanishing, replaced by something elemental and hungry. She had to run. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the searing pain in her knee, and turned. "Stop." The word was not a request. It was an unbreakable command, laced with alpha authority that rooted her to the spot, her muscles locked, her body betraying her will. She could only stand there, trembling. As he closed the distance between them, he was a foot away now, a mountain of shadow and heat. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing against the torn fabric at her shoulder. A jolt, hot and electric, shot through her. His touch was both a brand and a balm. "If you take another step," he rasped, his voice thick with a desperate struggle, "the wolf in me will not be able to stop himself from marking you right here." His head dipped low, his nose tracing the line of her throat. She could feel his hot breath on her skin, could smell the storm brewing inside him. The silver in his eyes was almost entirely gone, consumed by the feral red of the blood moon. He was losing. Fear warred with a strange, inexplicable pull. She should be screaming, fighting. But a part of her, the lonely, exiled wolf part, felt a sense of coming home. It was madness. Summoning a sliver of defiance, she lifted a trembling hand and laid it against his cheek. His skin was rough with stubble, hot as a fever. "Raven," she whispered, not knowing how she knew his name. The touch, her voice, seemed to break through the haze of bloodlust. His eyes widened, the red receding for a brief, agonizing moment, leaving behind the tortured silver of the man. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and what she saw in his gaze was not just rage, but a profound, soul-deep despair. He saw his mate, and he saw his curse. She was not a gift from the moon goddess. She was a temptation sent to destroy him. With a roar that was pure animal agony, he shoved her away. "Get out," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Leave this forest before I remember what you make me feel." Just as he spoke, the last sliver of the blood moon dipped below the horizon. The malevolent red light vanished, replaced by the soft, clean glow of the stars. The power that had been fueling his transformation snapped. Raven Thorn crumpled to his knees, his massive frame shaking with violent tremors. He threw his head back and howled, but it was not the sound of an alpha. It was the sound of a man broken, a soul weeping. Lyra stood frozen, her heart breaking for the monster who had just threatened to claim her. Then, as the adrenaline faded, the pain in her leg returned with a vengeance, and the world dissolved into a dizzying vortex of black. She fell, her last conscious thought not of fear, but of the tormented silver in the alpha's eyes. Lyra woke to the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs. The surface beneath her was soft, a pile of thick furs that felt like heaven against her bruised skin. A fire crackled in a stone hearth nearby, its warm orange light dancing across the rough-hewn rock walls of a cave. This was not the unforgiving forest floor. She sat up too quickly, a wave of dizziness washing over her. Her knee was wrapped in a clean, tight bandage. A soothing poultice of crushed leaves spread over the wound. Her torn tunic had been replaced with a simple, oversized linen shirt that smelled faintly of pine, and the man who had worn it last. Raven Thorn. Panic tightened its icy grip around her heart. She was in his den, the monster's lair. The entrance to the cave was covered by a heavy hide flap, but she could hear the low murmur of voices outside. She scrambled off the furs, her bandaged leg protesting with a dull throb, and crept toward the opening, peeking through a small gap. She saw the heart of the Moonfang pack. It was a vast, multi-leveled cavern system, lit by torches and fire pits. Wolves in various states of human and shifted form moved with a quiet, disciplined purpose. There was no laughter, no idle chatter. The air was thick with a heavy, almost mournful reverence. They feared their alpha, but they were devoted to him. It was a loyalty born of power and terror. A man with a kind, weary face and hair the color of sand stood near the entrance, speaking in low tones to a hulking warrior. He wore the mark of the beta, a single, diagonal scar across his left eyebrow. "Can't keep her here." "Elias," the warrior rumbled. "The alpha has forbidden it. Since Seraphina. No she-wolf." "The alpha is the one who brought her here, Kale. The beta," Elias replied, his voice calm but firm. "He carried her himself. Then he locked himself in the lower chambers. He hasn't been seen since the moon set." Kale grunted, his eyes flicking nervously toward a dark, descending tunnel. "The madness gets worse with every cycle. This girl, her scent is strong. It will drive him over the edge." Lyra's blood ran cold. Since Seraphina, they were talking about her as if she were a disease, a contagion that threatened their volatile leader. She was a prisoner. She let the hide flap fall back into place, her mind racing. She had to escape, but how? She was injured, deep in enemy territory, with a pack of hardened warriors just outside. A shadow fell over the entrance, and the flap was pulled aside. Raven Thorn stood there, filling the doorway. He had changed into dark leather breeches and a simple tunic. The feral madness was gone from his eyes, replaced by an impenetrable wall of glacial silver. He looked not at her, but through her, his expression cold and unreadable. He carried a wooden bowl of steaming stew in a water skin, which he placed on a flat rock near the fire. He didn't speak a word. "Why did you bring me here?" Lyra's voice was a hoarse whisper, but it cut through the silence. He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her with a detached assessment, as if she were a piece of livestock. "You were injured on my land. Moonfang wolves are not savages who leave the wounded to die. You will eat, you will heal, and then you will leave." His voice was a monotone, devoid of the raw, desperate emotion she had heard in the forest. This was the alpha in control, the man who had locked the beast back in its cage. "You called me your mate," she challenged, the words tasting like recklessness on her tongue. A flicker of something pain, anger, regret flashed in his eyes before being ruthlessly extinguished. The blood moon makes liars of us all. It shows us what we desire most, only to taunt us. "You are nothing to me." The words were a slap, and they stung more than she cared to admit. The strange connection she'd felt, the sense of belonging, had clearly been a one-sided delusion. "Then let me leave now," she said, pushing herself to her feet. "I can manage." "No." The single word was absolute. "The Blackwoods are still patrolling the borders, hungry for a stray. And my own pack, they are unsettled by your presence. You are safer here, as my prisoner, than you are out there, as a free woman." He turned to leave, his dismissal of her complete. What happened to Seraphina, she called after him. The name Kael had spoken echoing in her mind. Raven froze, his back rigid. For a long moment, he didn't move. The air in the small cave grew heavy, Suffocating. When he finally turned his head, his profile was etched in stone, and his voice was so low, so cold, it could have frozen the fire in the hearth. "You will never speak that name again." He was gone, leaving Lyra alone with the crackling fire and the suffocating weight of his secrets. She was trapped not just in a cave, but in the prison of his past. Over the next few days, a tense routine was established. Elias would bring her food and change the dressing on her knee. He was polite but distant, his eyes full of a sad pity she didn't understand. The rest of the pack avoided her chamber as if it were cursed. And Raven was a ghost. She would feel his presence before she saw him, a sudden shift in the air, a prickling on her skin. He would stand at the entrance for long, silent moments, just watching her. He never spoke. He was a sentinel guarding his own cage, and she was the thing locked inside with his monster. One afternoon, he came with Elias to inspect her wound. As he knelt before her, his large, scarred hands unwrapped the bandage with a surprisingly gentle touch. The forced proximity was agonizing. His scent enveloped her, a heady mix of strength and sorrow that made her head spin. She could hear the steady, powerful beat of his heart. As his fingers brushed the skin of her calf, a jolt of energy, white-hot and undeniable, passed between them. He flinched back as if burned, his silver eyes locking with hers. In their depths, she saw the beast stir, its red-tinged gaze hungry and possessive. He saw her, not as a prisoner, but as the other half of his soul, and the sight terrified him. He rose abruptly, his control snapping back into place like a shield. "She is well enough to travel," he said to Elias, his voice rough. "Make preparations for her to leave at dawn." He turned and strode from the cave without a backward glance, leaving Lyra with a hollow ache in her chest. He was pushing her away again, pushing away the very thing his soul was crying out for. She was beginning to realize that she wasn't just his prisoner. In a way, they were both trapped in this cage together. The dawn came not with light, but with a deeper, more oppressive darkness. The wind howled like a grieving wolf around the mountain, driving a thick, blinding snow before it. A blizzard had descended upon the peaks, sealing the moon-fanged den from the outside world as surely as a locked door. There would be no leaving today. The pack retreated deeper into the warren of caves, a low hum of anxiety running through them. Lyra was moved from her isolated chamber to a larger, communal area. Though a wide berth was still kept around her, she watched as families huddled together, sharing stories and mending tools. It was a picture of community she had never known, yet she was utterly separate from it. Raven was a constant, brooding presence. He moved through the caverns, his authority a palpable force, ensuring rations were distributed and the den was secure. But his eyes, she noticed, always found their way back to her. They were filled with a frustrated, caged energy, as if the storm outside was a physical manifestation of the one raging inside him. As night fell, the blizzard intensified. The temperature plummeted. A section of the outer caverns, where many of the younger wolves slept, became dangerously cold. "We need to move them to the core," Elias said to Raven, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "The Alpha's den is the warmest." Raven's jaw tightened. His private den, the one he'd locked himself in after bringing her here, was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude. "Do it," he commanded, his voice tight. The move was made quickly. Families and young wolves crowded into the warmer spaces, and soon only one cavern remained with a single, empty sleeping fur, and only one person was left without a place. Lyra. Elias approached Raven, his expression grim. "Alpha, there is no other warm place for her." Every eye in the cavern turned to them, to put the strange she-wolf, the catalyst for the Alpha's madness, in his private den for the night was unthinkable, a challenge, a temptation. Raven's gaze fell upon Lyra. She met it squarely, her chin held high, refusing to show the fear that fluttered in her stomach. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the howling of the wind. "She will stay with me," Raven said at last, the words dropping like stones into the silence. He turned and strode toward the dark tunnel that led to his den, not waiting to see if she followed. The pack stared after her as she hobbled down the passageway, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. She felt like a sacrifice being led to the altar. The Alpha's den was stark and monastic. It was a deep, circular cave, dominated by a large hearth where a fire burned low. A massive bed of furs, easily large enough for 4 people, was the only furnishing. The air smelled intensely of pine and cold stone and a faint, lingering trace of sorrow. He gestured to one side of the fur pile. "You will sleep there. Do not cross to my side." Lyra nodded, her throat too dry to speak. She settled onto the furs, pulling a heavy pelt over herself, acutely aware of him moving on the other side of the small cave. He banked the fire, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the faint, pulsing glow of the embers. He lay down on his side of the furs, his back to her. The space between them felt like a chasm, a mile-wide canyon of unspoken history and forbidden desire. Sleep was impossible. The blizzard raged outside, a symphony of chaos. But inside the den, the silence was even louder. She could hear him breathing a slow, controlled rhythm that she knew was forced. He was as awake and aware as she was. Hours passed. The storm outside began to quiet, its fury spent. The den grew colder. Lyra shivered, pulling the pelt tighter. Despite the fire, a deep chill had settled into her bones. A low sound broke the silence, a whimper. It came from Raven. He was asleep, his controlled breathing finally gone, replaced by something rougher, more uneven. He shifted, turning onto his back. Even in the dim light, she could see the sheen of sweat on his brow. His face was contorted in a mask of pain. "No," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep and anguish. "Seraphina, don't." The name, the one he had forbidden. He was dreaming of her. Lyra's heart ached with a strange, fierce jealousy and a deeper, more profound compassion. This was the source of his pain. This was the ghost that haunted him. He thrashed, a violent tremor running through his powerful frame. "The blood, it's too much. I can't stop it." He was reliving a nightmare, drawn by an impulse she couldn't control. Lyra moved across the furs, ignoring his command. The chasm vanished. She knelt beside him, her hand hovering over his chest. His heart was pounding, a frantic, panicked rhythm. "Please," he whispered, a tear tracing a path from the corner of his eye into his hair. "Don't die this time. Please, don't die again." Her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't just mourning a lost love. He was drowning in guilt. He believed he was responsible for her death. Without thinking, she laid her hand gently on his chest, right over his heart. His skin was scorching hot. At her touch, a shudder went through him, but it was different. The violent thrashing ceased. The panicked edge to his breathing softened. Beneath her palm, she felt something strange, a network of raised scars, thin and delicate, like spider webs. It was a bite mark, an old one. And as her fingers traced its outline, a faint silvery light pulsed from the scar, warming her hand. It felt like a sigh of relief, a whisper of magic. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they were unfocused, lost in the dream. Then they cleared, and he saw her. He saw her hand on his chest, her face inches from his, her eyes wide with concern and a dawning understanding. The Alpha's mask slammed back into place, but it was too late. She had seen the raw, bleeding wound he kept hidden from the world. He didn't snarl or push her away. He simply lay there, his silver eyes locking with hers, and in their depths, she saw not a monster, but a man condemned, a prisoner of his own power. terrified that the very thing he was destined for a mate's love was also his inescapable doom. The storm was over, but the silence that followed was far more dangerous. The fragile truce of the night was shattered by the cold light of morning. Raven was gone when Lyra awoke, the furs beside her empty and cold. The unspoken intimacy of the dream, of her touch, had been erased by the harsh reality of the day. He was avoiding her with a renewed, desperate intensity. It was Elias who finally gave the ghost a name and a story. He found her sitting by the main fire, tracing patterns in the ash with a stick. He sat beside her, handing her a warm mug of broth. "He will not speak of it," Elias said, his voice low and heavy. "His pride and his guilt are a fortress. But you deserve to know what you have walked into." Lyra looked at him, her heart thumping a slow, steady rhythm of dread. Seraphina was his first. Elias began, his eyes fixed on the flames, his destined mate. He found her when he was young, barely more than a boy, just after he'd won his alpha trials. They were the promise of a golden era for our pack. She was fire and laughter, the perfect balance to his storm. A sad smile touched the beta's lips, but the Thorn bloodline is different. It is ancient, powerful, and cursed. The first alpha, the progenitor of our pack, made a pact with the spirit of the blood moon for unmatched strength. The power came at a price. For every generation, the alpha's bond with his mate is predatory. The marking, the bite that should be a symbol of union, instead becomes a conduit. The alpha's ancient bloodline begins to slowly, inexorably, drain the life force from his mate. Lyra stared at him, horrified. "Drain it. You mean, it kills them?" Elias nodded, his expression bleak. For centuries, the Thorn alphas learned to manage it. They would only mark their mates during a full white moon. When the curse was weakest, the bond would be strong, but the drain would be slow, allowing their lunas to live long, if not always easy, lives. But Raven, he did not know the full extent of the curse. His father died before he could teach him. He marked Seraphina on the night of a rising blood moon. The fire crackled, spitting an ember onto the stone hearth. It was like poison in her veins, Elias whispered, his voice thick with remembered pain. She grew weaker by the day. We didn't understand. We thought it was an illness. Raven was frantic. He spent every moment with her, trying to heal her, to give her his strength. But his very presence, the bond he thought was a lifeline, was what was killing her. He paused, taking a shaky breath. The end came during the next blood moon. The power of the curse surged within him, and it overwhelmed her. He held her in his arms as her spirit faded away. He felt her die through the bond. He said it was like having half his soul torn out and set on fire. Lyra's hand flew to her own chest, where a phantom ache had blossomed. Now his nightmare made sense. Don't die, this time. The bite mark on his chest. She breathed. It was hers. She bit him as she was dying. Elias confirmed, a final act of love, a way to leave a piece of herself with him forever. He believes that bite is his penance. Since that day, he has sworn he will never take another mate. He fights the instinct with every fiber of his being. He would rather live an eternity alone and in torment than be responsible for another's death. He sees you, Lyra, and he doesn't see a future. He sees a ghost. The truth settled over Lyra, heavy and suffocating. Raven's coldness wasn't cruelty. It was a desperate act of protection. His rejection was a shield. The monster she feared wasn't the beast that awoke under the blood moon. It was the man haunted by a love that had become a death sentence. Her fear, which had been a constant companion, slowly began to transform. It melted away, replaced by a fierce, burning empathy that solidified into resolve. He saw her as a weakness, a fatal temptation. But what if she wasn't? Her blood was different, half human, half wolf. A half-blood had never been a Luna. What if her unique nature was not a curse, but an answer? She found him in the training grounds, a vast upper cavern where the younger wolves sparred. He was demonstrating a move, his body a blur of controlled, lethal grace. He moved with the power of an avalanche, yet every step was precise, deliberate, but his eyes were hollow. When the training was over, she approached him. The other wolves melted away, sensing the impending storm. "I know about the curse," she said, her voice steady. His body went rigid. He turned to face her, his silver eyes flashing with fury. "Elias has a loose tongue." "He has a loyal heart," she countered. "He doesn't want to see you destroy yourself. Neither do I." "You know nothing," he snarled, advancing on her. "You think because you shared my bed for one night you understand my pain. You are a child who has stumbled into a graveyard. Run from it before you are buried here too." "I'm not afraid of you, Raven." "You should be," he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "I am not a hero in some tale. Little wolf, I am the monster. My love is a poison. My bite is death. The part of me that screams for you is the very part that would obliterate you. My blood is different," she insisted, her voice gaining strength. "I'm a half-blood. What if it's strong enough to withstand the curse? What if I'm not the ghost of your past, but the hope for your future?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound with no humor in it. "Hope is a luxury for those who have something left to lose. I have nothing. You will leave my territory tomorrow. Lyra Hale, that is my final word." He turned his back on her, a clear dismissal. The pain of it was a physical blow, to be so close to understanding him, only to be shut out completely. "No," she said quietly. He stopped, turning slowly. "What did you say?" "I said no," she repeated, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. "You can't make me go. This bond, it works both ways. You feel it just as I do. You can exile me from your land, but you can't exile me from your soul." For a terrifying second, she thought he would strike her. The beast surged in his eyes, the crimson swirling with silver. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the knuckles white. He was fighting a war on two fronts against her and against himself. He won. The beast receded, leaving the cold, tormented man in its place. "Then you are a fool," he said, his voice flat and dead. He walked away, each step an act of supreme self-control. As she watched him go, a sense of dread washed over her. He was pushing her away to save her life, but in doing so, he was walking willingly back into his own private hell. She looked up, through a fissure in the cavern ceiling. The sky was a pale, wintry blue, but she could feel it in her bones, in the thrumming of the earth. The moon was waxing, the crimson tide was coming again, and this time, she wouldn't be running from him. She would be running toward him. The scent of her defiance clung to Raven for days. It was a brand on his soul, a whisper in his blood that refused to be silenced. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing before him, her chin lifted, her gaze unwavering. "You can't exile me from your soul." She was right, and that terrified him more than any curse. He gave the order. Two of his most trusted warriors were to escort her to the southern border at dawn, to hand her off to a neutral pack with instructions to see her to human lands. It was a death sentence for his own heart, but a chance at life for hers. He watched from the shadows as she was led away, a small, solitary figure wrapped in a heavy cloak. She did not look back. Each step she took away from him was a hot coal against his skin, a severing of sinew. The bond stretched, thinned, but did not break. It was a chain of agony. As he turned to retreat into the darkness of his den, a low growl from behind him stopped him. It was Kyle, the hulking warrior who had first questioned Lyra's presence. With him were three others, their faces set in grim, determined lines. "You are a fool, Alpha," Cale snarled. Stepping forward, he had never dared speak to Raven with such disrespect. "You throw away the very thing that could save us." Raven's eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself." "Her blood," Cale said, his voice dropping. "The half-blood. It is the key. An old prophecy speaks of a Luna of two worlds who can absorb the curse. You would send her away, content to let this pack be ruled by a monster. When salvation is within your grasp, we will not allow it." Before Raven could react, Cale and his followers shifted, bones cracked and reformed, muscle and sinew twisting as they transformed into their massive wolf forms. They were not waiting for permission. They were going after her. They didn't see a woman to be saved. They saw a resource to be claimed. A white-hot rage, purer and more potent than anything the blood moon could conjure, exploded in Raven's chest. "You will not touch her," he roared, and the very stones of the cavern trembled with his alpha command. But their ambition was stronger than their fear. They ignored his order and bolted, 4 dark shapes disappearing into the snow-dusted forest. Raven didn't hesitate. He let the change take him, a willing surrender to the beast for the first time in years. His own transformation was a symphony of brutal power. He grew larger than the others, his fur the color of a starless midnight, his eyes burning silver fire. He launched himself into the forest, his paws barely touching the ground. He was not just an alpha. He was a force of nature, and his purpose was singular. Find her, protect her, destroy anything that stands in the way. Lyra knew she was being followed long before she heard them. The 2 guards Raven had sent with her were good, but they were tense, their eyes constantly scanning the trees. The air itself felt wrong, charged with a predatory energy. Then, the howls came, not the lonely call of a wolf, but the coordinated cries of a hunting party. Her guards exchanged a look of pure terror. "They've defied him," one whispered. "It's Cale. He wants your blood." They broke into a run, dragging her with them, but they were no match for 4 determined hunters. The wolves burst from the trees, a blur of fur and teeth. The guards shifted to fight, a brave but futile gesture. They were outnumbered and overpowered. Lyra scrambled away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran, fueled by pure adrenaline, toward the only landmark she could see, a high, lonely cliff that jutted out over the forest like the prow of a stone ship. She reached the edge, the wind tearing at her cloak, a sheer drop to the pine-filled valley below. She was trapped. Cale, in his massive gray wolf form, cornered her, his lips peeled back in a triumphant snarl. The others fanned out, cutting off any escape. He lunged. A black shape, impossibly large and fast, slammed into him from the side. It was Raven. He was magnificent and terrifying, a demon of shadow and fury. He moved with a speed and brutality that made Cale's aggression look like child's play. He was not just fighting, he was executing. He tore into Cale's flank, his growls the sound of grinding rock. But as he fought, Lyra saw the sky through the trees. The sun was setting, and on the horizon, the moon was rising. It was not white or silver. It was a malevolent, bloody red. As the first rays of the blood moon touched him, Raven screamed. It was a sound caught between man and beast, a sound of his very soul being torn in two. His form swelled, the muscles coiling and knotting. The silver in his eyes was instantly devoured by a burning, infernal crimson. The man was gone. There was only the monster. The beast that was now Raven dispatched Cale's remaining followers with an unthinking, savage efficiency. Then it turned, its burning red eyes, devoid of all reason and memory, fixed on the last living thing on the cliff, on her. It stalked toward her, a low, possessive growl rumbling in its chest. This was not the alpha who had fought to protect her. This was the curse made flesh. It saw only one thing, mate, and its instinct was not to protect, but to possess, to claim, to mark. This was the moment Seraphina must have faced, the moment of truth. Lara could try to fight, or she could run and let it chase her down, or she could do the one thing no one else ever had. She could trust. Instead of backing away, she took a step forward. The beast paused, its head cocking in confusion. "Raven," she said, her voice soft but clear over the wind. "I'm here. I'm not running." It took another step, its massive fangs, slick with the blood of its enemies, on full display. It was a creature of pure, mindless instinct. She held her ground. She thought of the man in the snowstorm, whispering his dead mate's name. She thought of the haunted look in his eyes when he pushed her away. She was not his curse. She was his anchor. As the beast loomed over her, ready to pounce, she did the unthinkable. She reached up and placed her hand on its massive snout. Its fur was coarse, its skin burning hot. It flinched, a tremor running through its body. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against its... "I am not her," she whispered, closing her eyes. "I will not leave you. I am your mate." Through the touch, through the bond that even the curse could not sever, she pushed all of her love, her empathy, her unwavering belief in the man trapped inside. She did not fight the beast. She embraced the soul it held captive. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a low whine escaped the beast's throat, a sound of profound confusion and pain. The crimson in its eyes flickered for one single miraculous second. A sliver of silver shone through. It was him. He was there. He saw her. Mine? The thought, his thought, echoed in her mind, clear as a bell. The moment of connection was shattered as Kale, bleeding but not beaten, lunged from the side, aiming for Lyra's throat. Raven's beast form reacted without thinking. It spun, intercepting Kale, but its sheer size and the momentum of the attack sent them all hurtling toward the edge of the cliff. Lyra lost her footing on the slick, blood-soaked rock. She cried out as she fell backward into the abyss. In that last second, she saw Raven's beast form, no longer a monster, but a protector, throw itself over the edge after her. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was a pair of eyes, no longer purely red, but a swirling vortex of crimson and silver, reaching for her as they fell together into the moonlit chasm. Silence and warmth. That was the first thing Lyra registered, a deep, enveloping warmth that seemed to seep into her very bones, chasing away a chill she hadn't realized she was carrying. She was lying on a bed of soft moss, a thick fur pelt draped over her. A small, smokeless fire burned nearby, casting a gentle, golden glow on the walls of a hidden cave. She sat up, her body aching but miraculously unbroken. A thick canopy of roots and earth formed the ceiling of their sanctuary. They had fallen, but they had been caught, cushioned by a deep snowdrift at the bottom of the chasm and sheltered by this grotto hidden behind a frozen waterfall. He was there, Raven. He was kneeling before the fire, his back to her. He was human again, wearing the tattered remains of his leather breeches. His broad back was a canvas of muscle and scars, rising and falling with a slow, steady rhythm. The oppressive, furious energy of the beast was gone. In its place was a profound stillness, a calm she had never felt from him before. "Raven," she whispered, her voice raspy. He turned slowly. His face was calm, the harsh lines softened, but it was his eyes that stole her breath away. They were pure, clear silver. The crimson was gone, not just suppressed, but utterly vanquished. He moved to her side, his movements fluid and filled with a quiet grace. He knelt before her, his silver eyes searching her face, filled with a raw, unguarded emotion that made her heart ache. It was a look of awe, of disbelief, and of a devotion so absolute it was terrifying. "The curse," she breathed. "It's gone." He nodded, a slow, wondering gesture. "When we fell, when I knew I was about to lose you just as I lost her, something broke inside me. The beast. The curse, it fought to claim you. But the man, the soul, it fought harder. It chose you. And your trust, Lyra, your trust was the key. You looked at the monster, and you saw me. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek. His touch was no longer a fire that threatened to consume, but a warmth that promised to heal. The prophecy was incomplete. It wasn't just the half-blood that was needed. It was a mate strong enough not to fight the beast, but to accept the man inside it. You didn't break the curse, Lyra. You fulfilled it. You balanced it. Tears welled in her eyes. Tears of relief and a joy so overwhelming it felt like pain. All the fear, the running, the loneliness, it had all led to this, to him. I was so scared, she admitted, her voice breaking. You were braver than any warrior I have ever known, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, echoing her gesture on the cliff. I am so sorry. For the fear I caused you, for pushing you away. I was trying to protect you from a monster that no longer exists. They stayed like that for a long time, simply breathing the same air, their hearts beating in a steady, synchronized rhythm. The bond between them was no longer a source of pain or danger. It was a quiet, powerful hum of completion, of peace. Finally, he pulled back slightly, his gaze dropping to her throat. The alpha's instinct, ancient and undeniable, was still there. The urge to mark her, to claim her as his, was a tangible thing in the air between them, but it was different now. It was not a hungry, possessive need, but a deep, reverent desire to seal their union. I need you to be mine. Lyra, he whispered, his voice raw, officially, before the pack, before the goddess, forever. She nodded, her heart soaring. Yes. He lowered his head, his lips tracing the sensitive skin of her neck. Just above her pulse point, she shivered, her head falling back in surrender. She waited for the sharp, claiming bite. But it didn't come. Instead, he lifted his head, his silver eyes dark with an intensity that made her entire body tremble. He took her hand and brought it to his own neck. No, he said, his voice a low, sacred vow. I will not mark you as a possession. I will not be the alpha who takes... We will be a union of equals, of two halves of one soul. He turned his head, exposing the strong column of his throat. You will mark me. Lyra stared at him, stunned. This was unheard of. A Luna marking an alpha. It was an act of ultimate trust, a complete reversal of the old laws of dominance. He was not just giving her his heart, he was giving her his power, his submission, his very life. Raven. Please, he breathed, let me be yours. As I have been since the moment I first caught your scent, let this be our beginning. With tears streaming down her face, Lyra leaned forward. Her wolf spirit, so long dormant and suppressed, rose within her. She felt the slight elongation of her canines, the primal instinct to claim her mate. She pressed her lips to his skin, and then, with a love that was both tender and fierce, she bit down. It was not a bite of violence, but of union. She felt the bond between them snap into its final, unbreakable place. A wave of pure energy, of life, of love, flowed from her into him at the same time. She felt his strength, his history, his soul, pouring into her. They were no longer two separate beings. When she pulled back, a perfect, delicate mark graced his neck. His eyes were closed, a single tear tracking down his cheek. He opened them, and the love she saw there was enough to last 1,000 lifetimes. He then lowered his head and gave her the alpha's bite, but it was different from the one she had expected. It was a gentle, reverent press of teeth against her skin, not to claim, but to answer, to complete the circle. Outside their hidden grotto, The first rays of the morning sun pierced through the canopy. A new day was dawning. They emerged from the chasm a week later, when Lyra's strength had fully returned and the last of the blizzard had melted from the lower valleys. They walked not as an alpha and his prisoner, but as a unified force, their hands intertwined, their steps perfectly in sync. The journey back to the Moonfang Den was silent, but it was a silence filled with a new language, a shared glance, a squeeze of the hand, the brush of his arm against hers. Each was a conversation, a reaffirmation of the unbreakable bond they now shared. Raven had been reborn. The brooding, tormented alpha was gone, replaced by a leader whose power was tempered by a quiet, joyful serenity. He smiled, a true, breathtaking smile that transformed his harsh features into something beautiful. The pack sentries spotted them from a high ridge. A warning howl went up, followed by a flurry of confused calls. By the time they reached the main entrance to the caverns, the entire Moonfang pack was assembled, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and disbelief. They had assumed their alpha was dead, lost to the blood moon and the fall. Elias was at the front, his weary face etched with a week of grief. When he saw them, his jaw dropped. He looked from Raven's clear silver eyes to Lyra, who stood not behind him, but beside him, her hand in his. Then his gaze fell upon the delicate bite mark on his alpha's neck. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated awe. Kael, his flank heavily bandaged, but his pride more deeply wounded, stood among the warriors, his expression one of sullen defeat. Raven did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He stood before his pack, his presence alone commanding their absolute attention. "The curse is broken," he announced, his voice clear and strong, echoing through the vast cavern. "The old laws are finished. A new age for the Moonfang begins today." He lifted Lyra's hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "This is Lyra, of my blood and of my soul, not just my mate. She is your Luna." A stunned silence fell over the pack. They stared at Lyra, the half-blood Omega, the outcast. But they did not see a weakling. They saw the female who had tamed their untamable alpha, the one who stood beside him as an equal. They saw the mark on his neck, a symbol of a power greater than mere dominance. It was Elias who moved first. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head in a gesture of profound respect. "Luna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. One by one, the rest of the pack followed. Warriors, mothers, elders, they all knelt before their new Luna, their postures a mix of reverence and hope. They were not just accepting her, they were embracing the change she represented. Only Kael and his few remaining followers remained standing. Raven's gaze, now cold as glacial ice, fell upon him. "You defied your alpha. You hunted your Luna. You put your own ambition before the good of this pack. You have no place here." He did not sentence Kael to death. The new Raven was not a tyrant. "You are exiled. Live with the knowledge that the very thing you sought to control and exploit was the salvation you threw away." Kael stared at him, his eyes burning with hatred, but he knew he was defeated. He turned and slunk away, disappearing into the forest, a ghost of the pack's dark past. That night, the den was filled with a celebration unlike any it had known for a generation. There was music and feasting, and for the first time in years, there was laughter. Raven moved through it all with Lyra at his side, a quiet, solid presence. He was still their powerful alpha, but his leadership was no longer born of fear. It was born of love for his mate and for his pack. Later, when the fires had burned low and a full, brilliant white moon had risen in the sky, Raven led Lyra to the highest peak of their mountain. The world spread out below them, a sea of silver-dusted pines under a blanket of stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. They stood in silence, watching the moon. "I used to hate the moon," he murmured into her hair. Every phase was a reminder of what I was, what I could become, a countdown to the madness. Lyra turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. She looked into his silver eyes, which reflected the celestial light above. The blood moon wasn't a curse. Raven. It was a promise, a test. It wasn't sent to make you a monster. It was sent to lead you to the one soul in the world who could see the man inside. He smiled, that slow, beautiful smile that was hers alone. And now, Lyra looked up at the pristine, white moon, then back at him. She rose on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. "Now," she whispered against his mouth, "every moon is just a light to guide me home to you." He deepened the kiss, a promise of forever, of a new dynasty built not on dominance, but on devotion. And as the wind howled through the pines, it no longer sounded like a lament of a lonely soul. It sounded like a song, the song of an alpha and his Luna, finally whole, finally home,